Avatar: The Last Airbender is almost undoubtedly the best animated TV series ever made, and within its excellent writing lie some of the greatest characters in fiction. Though amongst these, there is one crowning jewel in my opinion. My favorite villain of all time, Azula, Princess of the Fire Nation. I have been wanting to make this video for some time, and now I finally decided to just do it. So prepare yourselves, folks. This will be a long one, and I sincerely hope you are all entertained and enlightened by what I have to say. Firstly, one thing I love about Azula is what she represents in the grand scheme of the show. Her point of view as a villain, acting superior to everyone else and believing she deserves to be above them, matches exactly with the Fire Nation's goals as a whole. Naturally, this is because these ideas were burned into her head by her father and others in the nation. And so she has basically become the very personification of the problems in this world that need to be fixed. And the struggles the characters face when fighting her represent fighting against the flawed worldview of an entire nation. In order to bring balance to the world, no nation must be superior to another. And likewise, Azula would eventually lose all her internal balance because she only ever saw herself as superior. So the drive to defeat Azula is a direct parallel to the drive of bringing peace. But because she is a character, it allows the themes of the show and the ending to connect more to the audience. Azula's introduction to the series comes in Season 2, Episode 1, The Avatar State. And no, I don't want to hear you funny boys in the comments talking about how she actually first appeared as a cameo in The Storm, or that she was teased at the end of Siege of the North. In her real first ever scene, she immediately establishes a very different tone to that of other villains we've seen in the series thus far, like Zuko or Zhao. Her introduction shows finesse, and an important focus on the order of things.
You can see it in just the simple way in which she is always adjusting her hair just ever so slightly, trying to make sure that it is as perfect, refined, and in control as possible.
Which is a perfect point to set up her character from, as there is no other character in the show who desires control over any given situation more than Azula. And it is a fantastic contrast to how she will end up by the final episodes of the series. Additionally, I love her theme music. Unlike most of the other songs in this show, this one has a very unsettling feel to it. The soft, graceful instruments portray the air of a princess. But the melody is slightly off and unnerving, like something isn't quite right. It's amazing because it makes every scene with Azula so intense. It makes you, the audience, feel tense whenever she appears, just like all the people around her in the episode. Her second scene is just as good as her introduction because it establishes her mindset. It shows us a glimpse as to why she is so off-putting.
Azula is the first character in this show who we see use lightning bending, which is just another thing that makes her stand out so much more from every other character up to this point in the show, and it shows us subtly just how dangerous she really is, since even though we don't get to see her actually use the lightning on anyone, the way in which the episode is directed makes it very clear to us how powerful lightning is, with how it takes so much more of a build-up to shoot, and Iroh makes certain to redirect it into a rock face instead of letting it hit either him or Zuko, and it does quite a lot of damage to that rock face too. Her training is a marvel to watch, and we can clearly see she values her skills and takes what she does very seriously. A perfect way to establish that she is a threat not to be brushed aside even before she does anything. And I love that her firebending is blue. Not only does this set her apart from the other villains and help her to stand out, but it also shows us how intense her fighting is, because blue fire is hotter than red fire. A perfect way to visually show us that she is more dangerous than any villain we've seen up to this point. But the most important part of this scene is how Azula reacts to her posture being slightly off. She starts to lose it. The twitch in her eye is unsettling and terrifying, and precisely what makes her so dangerous. She takes what she does too seriously, needing to do everything impeccably perfect without even the most minor of flaws, and anything less isn't good enough for her.
Almost isn't good enough.
She is dangerous because achieving victory over her only makes her more dangerous in turn, since she will seek vengeance to prove herself and erase that mistake from her record viciously. I must also mention one of her primary tools and weapons, her devilish tongue. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Let me rephrase that. Her devious words of deception, aka her lies. Azula's constant lying is instantly the thing that makes you dislike her. She can say anything she wants and get away with it because she always lies in a way that makes people believe she is thinking about them and not herself. Zuko, for instance, almost falls right into her trap because he so desperately wants her lies to be true, and he has given into the illusion that she has created. Iroh, however, is not so gullible, but they make it out of this situation by the skin of their teeth. And not because they wised up per se, but because of the ship captain's error.
We're taking the prisoners home!
She is so successful with her lies because she has the power and influence to make people believe that she can give them what they want and tell them what they want to hear. And if that doesn't work, she'll start doing or saying terrible things until you change your mind. Azula is one of the most frightening characters in all of animation, in my opinion. Every fight she takes place in, she always feels like the greatest threat and a nigh unstoppable force. She feels almost like a ticking time bomb, or the characters have to rush to complete their objective before she shows up, or else they've basically lost. Her fighting style is also really cool in my opinion. I love how she uses her feet a lot, making her feel like a deadly acrobat, and her athletic moves combined with the abilities to shoot fire from all directions makes her feel 3 times more deadly than most of the other characters in the show, and a marvel to behold whenever she is doing her deathly stunts. On top of that, another major reason why she is quite terrifying is because she always gets her way. I was just looking at the next sentence, and it appears I accidentally wrote her constant need to always be the pest, which is technically not wrong if you think about it, but I had actually meant to write her constant need to always be the best. Anyway, her constant need to always be the best and achieve her goals means that she is willing to do anything to achieve that. And if something isn't going her way, the first person she will turn on is her own allies. Because she always wants to be perfect, she'll always find a way to scapegoat her own problems onto someone else so that she can claim to be innocent of the error. Just take this scene from her first episode as an example. The captain of the ship is simply doing his job and steering them well, but because of factors out of his own control, he isn't doing his job well enough for Azula, and she accuses him of being a fool who is undermining her wishes, and that he should do better. Azula never wants to be late or unpunctual.
We arrive right on time because we are very punctual.
But it is her problem if she doesn't arrive on time. She should have taken into account the weather and left sooner if she wanted to arrive on time. But she makes her minor miscalculation appear to be the fault of the captain, and she guilt-trips him into risking their voyage just to make herself appear more perfect than she is.
Do the tides command this ship?
I'm afraid I don't understand.
You said the tides would not allow us to bring the ship in. Do the tides command this ship?
No, Princess.
And if I were to have you thrown overboard, would the tides think twice about smashing you against the rocky shore?
No, Princess.
Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides, who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over.
And if something goes wrong with the ship, she can claim the captain did that as well. And no one dares speak against her because she is the princess. It's part of why she always gets her way. She is infuriatingly frustrating, but in the best possible way, because it makes us dislike her more and want her to get put in her place, making her inevitable downfall at the end of the series more satisfying. Azula is powerful, but perhaps her most effective method has less to do with using her powers than making people too afraid to let her use her powers. Azula craves control because it's the only way for her to ensure things go as perfectly as she wants them to. But nobody likes her for who she is, and so the only way to make them do what she wants is to make them fear her, and what she could do to them. She threatens them with her skills of firebending, certainly, but more importantly than that, her first response is to abuse her position. Her strongest claim is that of being the princess, because People only care about her because she is royalty, and they will listen not because they were always afraid of what she might do to them, as much as they are afraid of what she threatens the Fire Lord will do to them. In a lot of ways, Azula's biggest strength, her power of authority, is not even her own. It's a power that she has borrowed from her father and made her own. This is important because it ties into how everything Azula is in service to her father. He made her who she is, and everything she does is in his name, because she knows it is the only way for her to use this great power of command. And on top of that, it makes her feel more special, because she knows people love and respect her father in the Fire Nation, and she hopes to leech off some of that love and respect they give him. It most definitely makes her feel more special than Zuko, since he has no respect or authority from their father, but this helped him to realize who he was as an individual, his own self, not just a servant to a master. Azula, in some ways, is just an extension of her father. Inside, she is too afraid to act for herself because she thinks she will lose her power. Azula also isn't above making her closest allies fear her, such as Ty Lee, and I love the scene where Ty Lee joins Azula, and I love how she only joins Azula because of what Azula can and will do if she doesn't join her. Azula doesn't actually care about Ty Lee, because if she did, she would let Ty Lee stay with the circus that she joined. Azula wants to control Ty Lee and manipulate the fact that they have known each other for so long to convince her to join her. And Ty Lee, perhaps, almost innocently, is too forgiving of Azula. Because she has known her for so long, she has come to see her wicked and toxic behavior as normal, and that's just how she is. Sadly, this means letting Azula get away with her actions because she is too afraid to criticize her old friend, worried she will come off as hating her personality, when really it is her actions that are at fault. Mai is similar, but perhaps less ignorant. She just wants to do something interesting, and her lack of emotional investment in anything leaves her open to Azula's manipulation as well. Azula takes advantage of Mai's desire and lack of emotion, to make her take part in her evil actions since she knows she won't care. And indeed, Mai only realizes the truth when Azula threatens the one thing she did truly care about. But up until then, they let themselves be pawns to an evil master because they were too ignorant to say anything or open their minds to the reality of what is really happening. Did I mention that Azula is actually kind of freaky? Like, actually genuinely scary at points? It's why she's so effective as a villain. It's great to have a good backstory and/or deep personality and motivation. But if the villain isn't scary or threatening in any way, it's hard to take them seriously. But Azula commands the attention of the audience every second she is on screen, which is brilliant because of her personal desire for attention and praise, and it allows us to feel what Azula is all about in almost a fourth wall breaking way beyond the screen. And the way she commands her presence on screen is almost always by making people suffer or threatening to do so. And she always makes her threats in such a laid-back, stuck-up way, as if she's saying that defying her is death, without actually ever saying that. It's the subtext that gives her lines so much weight, the real meaning behind her lies. She never really says exactly what she means. We know she is always thinking of the horrible things she might do to people, but rarely ever says what those things are. And it's the thoughts of our imagination that run so wild over the possibilities of what terrible things she really means that makes her so frightening. And likewise, the characters in the show see her the same way. Their fear of her makes us, the audience, fear her more. It's like the fear is contagious. And every time she doesn't get exactly what she wants, her smirk of self-satisfaction dissolves in an instant into one of the most terrifying, intense stares of hatred ever seen. I can't think of another character who manages to flip from stable to unstable so easily and yet be equally scary in both forms. Because that intense crooked side you see in that state is who she really is all the time. She just pretends to not be like that. It's more than just fear she commands, though. She bends that fear into a weapon, and she is a very effective fighter, too. Take the episode The Chase, for example. Azula and her gang are terrifying in this episode because they are so relentless. Azula intends to capture Aang no matter what, and our main characters are almost helpless. They didn't realize who or what they were dealing with. and so they are forced to escape with basically no energy left. This is another perfect example of how you know something isn't quite right with Azula mentally. While she chases down the heroes, she and her friends are unfazed by the time and don't even desire sleep. Azula could never bring herself to take a rest here because her mission is not yet complete, and because she knows if that she continues relentlessly, eventually the Avatar will get tired and become weak and vulnerable. Her logical mind of deducing the most effective method to win demands she takes advantage of this situation, regardless of her own mental health, because it is her best shot at victory. And eventually, she does find Aang, and in this moment you feel her full terror. Because Aang is so tired, it makes you in the audience wonder what he will do. Azula seems fine, but probably because the dopamine and adrenaline from the thoughts of achieving something as great as killing the Avatar flood her mind and keep her going. She is literally being powered by her own desire to win, and she puts up quite a fight too. The only time she almost slips up is when she doesn't take into account her surroundings, which may be a clever way of hinting at her final defeat. She is so focused on her enemy and beating them to prove she is better, she doesn't pay as much attention to what surrounds her in her environment. I like that Aang is basically only saved by the others showing up, all with something against Azula, backing her into a corner. Azula knows she won't win, but even just accepting that idea is too much of a failure for her. And so she turns her power on the person she knows would least expect her blow, and the one most likely to halt the entire group from following her, Iroh. He may be a powerful firebender, but he is still an old man who can't take the full brunt of an attack that Azula is capable of dishing out very easily. And unlike attacking any of Team Avatar, attacking Iroh would force Zuko to stop attacking her, since he cares about his uncle, but probably wouldn't care too much if any of the others got hit. Even in a tight spot, Azula is dangerous and can't be trusted, willing to use low-brow attacks to get the advantage. It almost makes you not want to fight her, because even if you're gaining the advantage, you're basically just setting yourself up for your own defeat. And of course, everything that Azula is, and how she became this way, has an origin, and whence she came is fundamental to who she becomes. Azula is inherently selfish, but she didn't need to be. She liked being the center of attention and thus wanted to always be seen and noticed. However, she often did so at the cost of others, and thus they began to reject her. Sadly, this only made Azula crave attention and acknowledgement even more, but this created an escalating issue in her mind. The more she tries to prove she is great, the more people reject her. As a child, she couldn't yet understand the superficial nature of what she desired, and saw rejection as people not thinking she was good enough, and her mindset only got worse every time she tried harder, only making people reject her more than the last time. Her resort was to try and put other people down. Now believing no one liked her, she felt no shame at their insults, and no guilt at giving out her own. If she couldn't get other people to love her, she could at least see herself as the best. Her attitude of constant striving to be the best, even at the cost of the emotional relationships she might have had with anyone, caught the eye of her father. Ozai soon realized that her emotional detachment and dedication to being superior made her a perfect candidate to serve him. And so he artificially began to praise her, so that she would side with him and do whatever he wanted, in the hopes that she might become a great asset to him in the future. And Azula, in turn, hoped she might finally be seen as great by someone. And as for Zuko, she began to treat him as worthless to make herself feel better. Knowing that her father was more impressed with herself, she used the opportunity to raise herself up further by putting Zuko down. After all, in her mind, he has never done anything for her. The saddest part being that she never had any real reason to dislike Zuko, and she threw away the chance for a genuine bond because of her insecurities about herself. Azula refuses to ever accept anything less than the best from herself and her allies. She is determined to win every fight she is in, and in her mind, if she can prove she is better than someone, she can claim to be better than anyone she sees as lesser than that person. It's part of what drives her to defeat Aang, as there is no one else in the world who could claim to be more powerful than the Avatar. Most of her victories along the way are not as exciting for her because they are just missions to complete. And even though she does them well, they don't really mean anything to her because she didn't plan them, she only completed them in the name of her father. Azula's victories are always hollow because she never actually achieves anything for herself. Her goal to please the Fire Lord only benefits him personally. Azula gets adoration from her father and power to do things at his command, but she is never satisfied with what she does, always wanting more and more, and it is because what she thinks she wants is just a feeling that lasts a moment. And trying to beat people is only a feeling that she can claim, but it amounts to little more than bragging rights when all is said and done. In order to truly be content with oneself, you must learn to accept yourself.
You have to look within yourself to save yourself from your other self. Only then will your true self reveal itself.
But Azula can never accept herself, because to her that would not be putting her full effort in. Acceptance is admittance of defeat in her eyes. She strives to be better, but it's never to improve herself. It's always to make a point and to keep up appearances. But you can't always continue to rise and rise. Everyone has a ceiling of skill and ability. Even the greatest masters of their crafts can never be 100% perfect. She wants to reach an impossible goal. The more she tries to be better and more perfect than before, the more she strays from the boundaries of her abilities and begins to lose the control she desperately needs in order to maintain her position and authority. Although, she manages quite a bit before she truly loses control, such as conquering all of Ba Sing Se with just her evil buddies.
My evil buddies and me. My evil buddies and me. My evil entourage.
Her and Mei and Ty Lee's disguises here are pretty much the ultimate form of her lies. Using her deceit to enter the palace and deceptively convince the most powerful soldiers to join her because of what she says. I love that Azula manages to convince them without even doing anything, but by making them believe she is more powerful and thus the most worth serving. She manipulates their desire to be on the winning team and their knowledge of the outside world. She knows that because they have gone to such great lengths to trick the city into believing there is no war, that they must be afraid of the consequences of what exists outside. And because of this, she knows that she can get them to join her if she just convinces them that serving her is something inevitable. And Long Fang's admittance of defeat is one of the most iconic Azula scenes for a reason.
You've beaten me at my own game.
Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
Not only is this one of the sickest insults in TV history, but her reasoning of being born to rule tells us a lot about her mindset and how she became who she is.
But true power, the divine right to rule, is something you're born with.
Azula was born a princess and naturally was told by her parents and the palace staff that she was special and would do great things in the future. So when things didn't go her way and she was scolded, she felt insecure and weak, and not any better than the average person. Because of this, she felt the need to prove to herself that what everyone said was true because she so desperately wanted it to be. And so, her competitive nature comes from a place of feeling unworthy of her own position. She is secretly scared that if she doesn't prove that to be true, then she won't actually be as special as she has been led to believe she is. And in fear of letting people call her unfit to be a princess, she puts 10 times more effort into proving herself than any other person probably ever would. And never because of anything they did. It's who she chooses to be. It's a message to herself that she isn't unworthy, like how she believed her mother thought of her. She can't let go of how she was seen as a child, being seen as special, even when there's definitive proof otherwise, that nobody is more special than anyone else. Zuko was also a prince, but Azula disregards him, choosing to believe he deliberately threw away his right to rule by being insolent. But she is a perfect daughter and a perfect princess who was born to rule, and that everything she achieves was meant to be and meant for no one else. I also love the way in which she gains power over Ba Sing Se. She believes it to be such an achievement, but in reality, she is making it out to be that she achieved more than she really claims. Yes, she took over the city, but she only did so by circumventing all the reasons that would normally prevent someone from claiming the city. Yet she treats her victory as if she bested all of Ba Sing Se's barriers herself. She basically only won because she cheated, and she wouldn't have won if she had done it the way everyone else did. Sure, it makes her clever for doing it this way, but she doesn't actually want people to think that she just lied and sat on a throne then called it a day. She wants people to believe she was an unstoppable force of destruction that all in the city feared. I mean, her very own previous attempt to take over the city was a massive failure. You know, the whole drill thing and all, proving that she herself wasn't actually powerful enough to beat the city, only through deception and trickery. And she can just blame the drill for going wrong because of the drill supervisor or something. Azula's constant victories, and so often are they through lowly and cheap methods, are part of what makes her such a hateable villain. And I mean that in the best possible way. I love that almost everything always goes the way Azula wants it to, and when she loses, it's rarely ever anything worse than a setback for her, because she always gets what she wants, and sees her victories through the lens of a spoiled child who deserved to get what they got, regardless of how they acted. It just makes you want her to lose and get a taste of her own medicine so badly. The desire to see Azula get what's coming to her is one of the best driving forces of this show, and one of the most outstandingly executed examples of audience engagement I have ever seen. But she isn't finished just yet. Under the earth, Aang, Katara, and Iroh wait to prevent her from her ultimate victory. One person, however, is still uncertain. Though Zuko wants to side with his uncle, Azula gets into his head, promising him everything he ever wanted if he joins her.
I need you, Zuko. I've plotted every move of this day, this glorious day in Fire Nation history, and the only way we win is together. At the end of this day, you will have your honor back. You will have Father's love. You will have everything you want.
Azula is able to take advantage of Zuko so easily because she can understand and see his insecurities. Because like him, she too is very insecure, though she would never admit it, even to herself. But nonetheless, she can see into Zuko's heart and mind, and realizes that Iroh is the only thing holding him back from joining her, since she can feel his desire for honor and proving himself is pulling harder than his feelings for Iroh in this moment. And so, she goes for the heart.
First, we attack his heart.
By claiming Iroh is a traitor, and that the only way to get his honor back is to turn on Iroh. She not only cuts the thread holding him down, but also strengthens his urge to side with her. Azula knows she needs help in this moment to win, because the Avatar plus 3 powerful benders in a moment of strong conviction for all of them may actually be a match too strong for her. But taking one of those benders and putting them on her side changes everything. It's essential for Azula to win here because if she fails, she loses Ba Sing Se as well, since the Dai Li would see that she isn't actually the strongest, and her victory is not as assured as she made them believe. And without them, she doesn't hold any real power in Ba Sing Se, and so by playing her cards right, she has not only turned one of her foes into an ally, but also practically guaranteed her continued success. Aang in this moment finally realizes what must be done, and is willing to sacrifice everything to stop Azula and Zuko. But even he didn't realize just how much he was about to sacrifice. Azula's attack on Aang here is one of the most despicable moves any villain has ever made. I say this because Azula could see he was in a state of weakness, and also knew that she would stand no chance if he entered the Avatar state. She stabs him in the back, making quite possibly the most dishonorable move you could make, because if she didn't, she would have lost, and that would break her perfect streak. This is the dangerous and unfortunate side of perfectionism at play. Regardless of what mental state Azula is in, this act of a devious and despicable nature is one that almost anyone with a perfectionist mindset might choose to make. For a perfectionist who is so obsessed with winning and being the best will do anything to achieve the goal they want. And sadly, that can mean coming at the cost of others and the respect one has for them.
Oh, hey there. I know some of you are perhaps not going to want to hear this, but if you could please use your lightning bending abilities to zap the like and subscribe buttons. You know, these videos do take a lot of work and effort to make, and I would also love if you watch my future videos and past videos I've made too. Anyway, also if you're rich, I totally have a Patreon that you can help support me on. Thank you to any patrons that I do already have. But just please don't use your lightning bending abilities on me, even though I know you want to at this moment for daring to say these things. Anyway, back to Azula.
Though Azula is fairly sure of her full victory at Ba Sing Se, she realizes that they never saw for certain whether Aang did actually kick the bucket, and because she is uncertain, she doesn't take risks that could negatively affect her. Risks mean opportunities for failures and embarrassment, and so she comes up with a scheme to set Zuko up. I love the way she asks him if the Avatar could have survived or not, and even though Zuko says no, she knows that he means yes.
No. There's no way he could have survived.
When are you gonna learn, SpongeBob? No means yes!
Azula knows this because she is such a good liar that she can always tell when someone else is lying to her. And because of this, she makes certain that all the credit for the death of the Avatar goes to Zuko. And of course, all the potential embarrassment and failure if he is right that the Avatar survived. Plus, she can pretend to pass it off as being nice, even if Zuko doesn't believe that for a second. This is the perfectionist mindset at play again. That it would be better to let go of the reward for completing something than to fail at completing that thing and taint the perfect record. And Azula doesn't need the reward of this achievement anyway, because she already thinks she's perfect. She believes that there's no higher goal she can reach. And because she knows that she was the one who was supposedly responsible for killing Aang, if he really is dead, then the only achievement she actually cares about is her personal satisfaction at killing him, since that would prove to herself that she is better than the Avatar. Anything after that point is worthless to her.
Oh, and there's another thing I wanted to mention, but I couldn't really find a good place to work it into the overall script, so I'm just gonna say it here. I love the scene in the headband when Zuko has been going to visit Iroh in the prison cells, and Azula assumes what he's been up to, and gets him to confess that that is what he's been doing based on her assumptions. And I love how it ties into the idea of Azula thinking she knows everyone so well, that she can predict every little thing that they will and will have been doing. And there's just a certain air of smugness to her in the fact that she was in fact right this time about what Zuko had been doing, and that she got him to confess to her assumptions without needing to find any evidence whatsoever. It's just another really great scene that I thought was worth bringing up.
The beach is a very interesting episode of Avatar. Unlike most episodes, very little in the way of major plot stuff happens. The same goes for intense action, only the brief scenes with Aang and company which are occasionally cut to from the main priority of the episode. The main priority being to explore the perspectives of our happy little band of Fire Nation buddies. Azula can't help always having to prove she is better than other people. Perhaps the most effective lie she has ever told was to herself. That the world will only believe you are amazing if you prove it to them, and if you prove it to them, everyone will think you are amazing. But the people of the beach in this episode are an existential threat to her worldview, because her attempts to prove to them that she is better don't work. She was fine before because she was on her own, or appearing in public. But here she is forced to interact personally, to speak to people face to face, people who don't even know who she is half the time. Her achievements mean nothing to them because they don't know her and thus don't care.
Yes! We defeated you for all time! You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation!
Who cares?
Well, it's easy for you to say.
Especially because she thinks she is superior. People don't like others who act superior. Human beings want to relate to others, and Azula's insistence that she is perfect and amazing and no one could ever be better than her makes people turn away. It's hard to relate to a perfect person, or at least someone who claims to be perfect, because you know you aren't perfect and they will never accept you. What is the point of hanging out with someone who has a superiority complex? All they will do is constantly put you down so that they can claim they are better. This causes Azula to face her worst inner fear: rejection. One of this episode's best scenes comes in the form of the campfire, and everyone finally letting out their inner demons, the secrets of themselves that have been haunting them. Azula's reaction to how the others bring up their insecurities is very interesting. She almost seems pleased to see them reveal how vulnerable they are. It makes her feel better about herself because she genuinely believes she is not afflicted with the same types of problems as them, even though she is. And their vulnerability allows her to mentally claim superiority over all of them, especially Zuko. It's very telling in how Azula treats this whole situation. She wants to feel like she too has a deeper side to her, but she doesn't want to make it appear as though that deeper, darker side underneath has made her any lesser. So she rejects the very thought that her mother's lack of love for her has affected her, saying that her mother was right. She chooses to accept the idea that she is a monster rather than admit her own flaws that have created this view of her. She'd rather be seen as heartless than emotionally weak. Azula's biggest insecurity is the fact that she doesn't accept her own insecurities. But that's not all for fascinating scenes involving the beach. Like I mentioned before, Azula spends a good portion of the episode acting like she is more important and special than the other people. She even goes out of her way to try and prove it, even in situations where it doesn't matter. A game of volleyball should be fun, not just an excuse to brag.
See that girl with the silly pigtails? When she runs toward the ball, there's just the slightest hesitation of her left foot. I'm willing to bet a childhood injury has weakened her. Keep serving the ball to her left and we'll destroy her and the rest of her team.
Yet, she is baffled when people don't seem to care or even turn away from her when she does this. Because of this, they don't really want to hang around her, because her constant need to act superior and to be the best makes them feel horrible. So they ignore her. All of this secretly offends Azula, since her main goal was to gather attention and adoration. If people leave and ignore her, then she isn't getting what she wants, and she can't understand why, because she has convinced herself that the only way to get what she wants is to act the way she does. And somehow it isn't working. Adding to this is the fact that Azula is royalty. She has been led to believe royalty deserved to be treated better and loved just for existing. So even though her efforts aren't working, she thinks that just making a point about her position is enough.
What about me and my brother? Aren't you going to invite us? You don't know who we are, do you?
Don't you know who we are? We're Chan and Ranjan. Yeah.
But still, no one cares. Just because she is royalty doesn't mean everyone knows who she is, or even cares about that fact. She is so obsessed with herself and how the world sees her, she doesn't consider the very idea that maybe some people just aren't going to have any interest in her regardless of what she does. She wants everyone to love her, because similar to Ty Lee's insecurity, if not even more so, she never had the love she needed when growing up, regardless of it being her own fault that she never got it. She is trying to overcompensate for not having the most important love in her life, the love of her mother, with the love of everyone else. And just like her insistence on never making a mistake, just one person not caring about her is enough to bother her and throw her off what she is trying to achieve. But there is one person amongst their group who has managed the impossible so easily.
Could you scooch just a little bit more to the... Perfect.
Azula is jealous of Ty Lee because she gains love and affection from people so effortlessly. All her life, Azula wanted people to see her as great, but she felt they never would or could unless she proved it to them by being so impeccably good at what she does. All the admiration of anyone she has ever achieved, she had to work so hard for, and yet also so much harder still to keep. But Ty Lee attracts people seemingly just by existing.
I met her first. Look, it doesn't matter who I met first, because I like you all.
Azula tries to see if she can get some of the attention that Ty Lee gets, but she approaches the situation all wrong.
Hey there, sweet sugar cakes. How you liking this party?
She sees the lack of love and care for herself as something she can actively do or say to instantly fix. But you can't make people genuinely like you just by saying something. You have to be yourself and allow people to see who you really are. Azula can't do this because she has bottled up her true emotions so deep inside herself that all she can understand is what is on the outside, and to her, Ty Lee and herself are no different on the outside from each other. Azula is incapable of normal human interaction because she has isolated herself so much, both mentally and physically, by spending so much of her life in the palace and seeing normal citizens as lesser than herself. She cannot understand them because her mentality rejects that.
That's a sharp outfit, Chan. Careful. You could puncture the hull of an Empire-class Fire Nation battleship, leaving thousands to drown at sea. Because it's so sharp.
Seeing them as being worthy of speaking to her on a normal level would mean she isn't as special as she wants to believe she is. And even when she gets partway into almost having a normal conversation, the illusion is shattered by her needing to try and make the person she is speaking to somehow important or special enough to talk to, by theorizing how powerful they would be in the future, undermining the idea of them both being normal. And, of course, scaring him away. Well, I mean, the way she said all that stuff was also pretty scary too, not gonna lie.
Together, you and I will be the strongest couple in the entire world. We will dominate the Earth!
Because Azula fails so badly here, her instinct kicks in like an emergency defense mechanism. She can't accept the idea that anyone wouldn't like her, so she overcompensates by telling herself that this man was a fool who couldn't understand her greatness. And she uses her power to force everyone to see how amazing she really is. If they won't believe what she says, she will make them believe it. She can't accept the idea that people reject her because she is different or how she acts, and believes their dislike of her is because she isn't good enough. And so, she forces herself on them until she is satisfied with feeling that they have been proven the weaker and more flawed individuals. And all because she doesn't want to be an outcast. It's an impossible conundrum she finds herself in, that she wants to be superior and yet fit in at the same time. But she can't have both. She doesn't want to play the part of the monster, but she believes she has to, because if she isn't a monster, she's a nobody that gets ignored, and to her, that's much worse. Azula is also present during the Day of Black Sun, the invasion. Her role here is essentially that of a massive distraction. As I've mentioned before, Azula is a master liar. So much so that not even Toph can sense her lying.
And stick to the truth. I'll be able to tell if you're lying.
Are you sure? I'm a pretty good liar. I am a 400-foot-tall purple platypus bear with pink horns and silver wings.
Okay, you're good, I admit it.
I love this detail because it not only perfectly lines up with her attitude and personality up to this point, but it shows just how shallow of a person she really is on the inside. Toph can't tell whether she is lying or not, even if what she said was an obvious lie, because Azula has spent so much of her life lying or concealing the true meaning of her words that it's basically the same to her as talking normally. It's part of why she fails to fit into normal society, and why no one can trust her, even her own allies. And the way Azula delays the characters in this scene is frustratingly good. I mean, it's beyond infuriating to watch. But that's the point, isn't it? She's so smug with how she lies effortlessly and smiles her way through the whole thing. I love how she doesn't even try to fight the characters here, because she knows it's pointless. The only thing that matters is making them lose their one advantage. It was never about winning here. She would never admit to herself or her nation being weak at this time, and instead acts like she is too tough to be beat regardless, even though both she and Team Avatar know full well that they didn't come here to battle with her. Azula's manipulation of Sokka at the end is also detestable. She has been emotionally manipulative to her own allies, but at least they have the advantage of falling back in line and submitting to her to avoid her threats. But Sokka has no such advantage, and her taunts hit hard because she knows there is nothing Sokka can do about this situation, and that his only lead is what she says. I also think it's worth noting how Azula personally doesn't have anything to gain from her actions. She's just a servant, the Fire Lord's loyal pet guard dog. She doesn't believe she has anything to gain because she thinks she's perfect, and has exactly the life she already wants. It's why she always treats every situation so lightly, like it's nothing, because she thinks she's already fulfilled, even though on the inside she isn't really. But what she can do is protect the source of her supposed fulfillment. Her father is the only reason she has what she has, and she knows that. So she will do whatever it takes to prevent him from being beaten, because his defeat is her defeat. It's why her false fulfillment is so empty. If a person were truly fulfilled, they would be satisfied with just themselves alone and nothing else. But that isn't how Azula sees fulfillment.
You must learn to let go.
She thinks she needs the attention and the benefits of being a powerful royal, and it's also why her achievements thus far have never made her feel satisfied. They aren't personal victories, only literal ones. Just events that happened. Her perfectionist viewpoint doesn't allow her to see any self-improvement in herself or others, and thus true satisfaction and fulfillment, because she already thinks she is perfect and incapable of improving herself. At least when it comes to her personality and position. Her own victories are just more eggs being added into the basket of the Fire Lord's grasp. And if anything happens to him in his little basket, she loses everything. The finale of the Boiling Rock is a massive turning point for Azula, an upheaval of everything she has relied on to get her so far. I love how Azula starts this episode just the same as before, more or less. But her sanity finally cracks at the end, when after a excellent final battle on top of the gondolas, I must say, in which she thinks she has won, ever so confidently escaping with her life, leaving the others to die, Mai finally decides she's had it and refuses to let Zuko die. because her loyalty to Azula is less important than the life of the only person she has ever truly had any strong emotional feelings for. Azula can't believe it. She had hoped that Mei and Zuko's relationship had broken so much that she wouldn't care just as much as she doesn't care about him. But she was wrong. The only reason Mei felt so strong about Zuko and her feelings of being abandoned by him was because she cared so much.
Hatred is too strong an emotion to waste on someone that you don't like.
That is beyond infuriating for Azula, because Mei's actions have not only saved Zuko's life, but made her look foolish for abandoning the fight.
I guess you just don't know people as well as you think you do. You miscalculated. I love Zuko more than I fear you.
No, you miscalculated! You should have feared me more!
She begins to lose it, because she knows that if she had seen Mei's betrayal coming, she would have stayed and fought and not abandoned the fight believing they would all die. She knows in her mind, though she struggles to accept the fact, that it was her own fault, an error of judgment that let them escape. And it's this fact that makes her snap, because she can't accept this idea. So she begins venting her personal rage at her actions onto someone else because she can't mentally handle the thought of miscalculating and messing up this badly. The fact that she tries to straight up kill Mei here is almost as much of a big mistake as the one before, because it proved to them, Ty Lee especially, that Azula never actually cared for them. If she really did, she wouldn't abandon them so suddenly and so fiercely. This is one of my favorite moments in the show, because it's almost like two abused and discarded slaves finally standing up for themselves and turning on their wicked master. Azula felt like Mei and Ty Lee would never betray her because they respected her and saw that her position was the superior place to be, but she only bought their loyalty with fear, manipulation, and promises of power. She thought they would follow her because they would want what she wants. But really, they would never go to the same lengths as her, and certainly not for her insane reasoning of power and false respect. You can't buy loyalty, it has to be earned. And Azula's methods are like poison to the very concept of trust. She lies, cheats, and manipulates. These are the very things that destroy trust, not create it. The way in which this causes Azula to break is perfectly fitting. She thought she could always control every situation and always get what she wants. And she is not just enraged, but baffled. She can't mentally handle the thought that things don't go her way, or that someone could slip from her grasp. She's too conceited and assured of her perfectionism that she can't see that this grave error is her own fault, and she pushes the blame onto Mei and Ty Lee instead. This is why she starts to lose control of herself. Because she refuses to see her faults, she continues to go on assuming she did nothing wrong, but agonizing inside over how something like this could happen if she never made a mistake. Azula's self-destructive mindset can only have one cure, at least in her mind: to erase this failure with another success. Azula's attack on the Western Air Temple is a fantastic scene. I adore her answer to Zuko's question here.
What are you doing here?
You mean it's not obvious yet? I am about to celebrate becoming an only child!
I absolutely love the way she delivers this line. You can tell that she isn't the same anymore. She is lashing out all her frustrations. It's almost inhumane in how she acts. Her actions speak very clearly. Her fury comes from an inner fear, the fear that she won't be seen as perfect, and she is putting all her effort into making a deadly show. And though she doesn't look it, she is upset at not killing Zuko, Aang, and the others here, letting them escape once again, even after all her efforts. When we next see her in The Phoenix King, she is on edge and terrified of the thought that her father refuses to let her join in on the mission that was her very own idea. Well, okay, technically Zuko gave her the idea by mistake, but still, she would definitely claim that it was entirely her own idea. Anyway, she feels cheated and perhaps even worried that her past mistake, the one thing that didn't go her way, would undo everything she has worked so hard for. She believes in perfectionism, because in her mind, anything less is pathetic and worthless. It's how she's always treated everyone else, and deep down it's her biggest fear, not being good enough. And even just one mistake is enough to upset her, and eat away at her own mentality. It may seem her worries are unfounded when she is made Fire Lord, a role she accepts, as it, in a sense, is everything she has worked for. Her ego is so large, she fails to see her own irrelevance in this situation. Becoming Fire Lord is pointless if Ozai is literally king of the world.
I'm the king of the world!
But all she has ever wanted was to be seen as great and the best. And this is finally her chance for people to look up to her as the greatest in all the land. But what is the point?
What for? What's the point?
She's just a puppet in the end. She wanted so badly to be great, but all from the perspective of a person desiring acceptance. All her achievements are meaningless because they were never hers, always her father's. She learned that the quickest way to gain admiration was to do as you were told, and to always do that better than anyone else. Being daughter of the Fire Lord offered her the unique opportunity to serve the most powerful and influential man in the nation. And through him, she gained all her influence and power, and not from herself or her own achievements, inward or outward. Just like how she manipulated the Dai Li into becoming her servants to fulfill her will, Ozai used her the same way she used them and everyone else. He knew she was clever and powerful, and manipulated her desire for admiration and respect to get her to do anything he wanted. And when her usefulness came to an end, he discarded her, just like she discarded her pawns. Only he did so subtly, stroking her ego as he let her go, as not to have her turn on him if she ever found out the truth of her worthlessness. Even if her position had any real power, she is incapable of being the leader of this land because she has spent her whole life serving the Fire Lord, never making any decisions of her own. Her mind has been catered specifically to think of the most efficient solution to a problem presented to her, but not how to sort the priorities of problems or negotiate or work as a team. Every problem she has ever solved already had the solution worked out for her. Her goal was always to complete her objective the best way she can, and almost always that meant on her own because she never trusted anyone else to do it right. And without trust, you cannot be a good leader. Likewise, she failed to create any meaningful or lasting relationships with anyone. She was so busy trying to appear loyal and superior that she always ignored everyone else. People were only ever distractions or tools in her eyes. If she couldn't use or manipulate them, then they were worthless to her. Even her own father was never someone who loved her or whom she loved. He only ever liked her because of her talents and wanted to use her. The only people she ever came close to trusting were her supposed friends, Mei and Tai Li. However, even they betrayed her, and that was the last straw. Now Azula believes everyone will eventually turn on her. Azula fundamentally misunderstands what true trust really is. No one could ever truly trust her because she never truly trusted anyone.
I don't trust you. The feeling is mutual.
She took for granted the idea that people would accept her power and authority and do everything she says, and that the proof they should serve her is that she was born to serve and has achieved great things. But nothing she ever did was for anyone other than herself. Her lack of care for people other than herself meant that no one could actually trust her because she never actually gave them a good reason to. She only saw the bigger picture of the great tapestry, and never the individual threads that made it what it is. And she thought she could raise herself so high that no one could compare. But all she achieved was severing herself from the rest of society, and with that, becoming too distant for any close connections or trust to be built. And it's her own flawed mindset that makes her so paranoid. The fact that she only sees the worst in people because that is what she would see in herself. She believes everyone is lesser than her and thus ignorant and envious of her. And so, if she were them, she would betray herself. And she only cannot see how flawed her mindset is because she could never see herself as anything less than perfect. But she can see her worst aspects in other people without realizing they are her worst aspects. But unknowingly, she has sabotaged herself, because without any true genuine friendships, she has never learned to trust or believe in anyone but herself. And so in her paranoia, she banishes everyone.
Is this how you plan to treat your new Fire Lord? With tardiness and disloyalty?
The Dai Li would never betray you.
And I'm sure that's just what you told Long Feng before you turned against him and joined me. You're all banished!
But...
Goodbye!
And because she has done this, she has left herself completely vulnerable.
Another really great subtle element to Azula's downfall is the way in which she messes up her hair so much, and how this specifically happens because there's no one to help her do her hair perfectly anymore. Her crazy, out-of-control hair is a perfect way to show the fact that she has lost all the control in her life, and her lack of control is a direct consequence of her own actions in trying to get rid of people because she refuses to trust them anymore.
Only at the end here, in her madness, can the truth behind her insanity and perfectionism be found. When she sees her mother reflected in the mirror, with no one else remaining, we see how lonely and worthless she really feels. As a child, she always wanted the love and affection of her mother, but she never got it, or so she believed. And now she hears thoughts of her mother giving her the one thing she always wanted, and we can see that she rejects this because she is too afraid to confront the fact that it was her own fault that she never got her mother's love, and that she has lived a life devoid of meaningful relationship because she convinced herself that her mother never loved her, and that if she couldn't, no one could. It's this feeling that has always haunted her and driven her forward, in search for admiration and love, but always being too afraid to accept it for fear of people rejecting her like her mother did. She doesn't want to change who she is because that would be like admitting she isn't perfect. And at this point, everything she is and everything everyone believes she is built upon her extreme perfectionism. It's the one thing she believes can make people like her. But being perfect is impossible for anyone, and it's not a fact of who she is, only what she does. And thus, she has never given anyone a thread of her true self to grasp onto and create a real relationship with. And once again, the only way she could avoid this would be to admit her flaws and open up. But her philosophy forbids her from doing so because she believes her reputation will collapse. And in a sad way, she's right. The way her father has crafted the Fire Nation and the way he sees her go against the idea of her ever opening up. It's why Zuko was banished, and she wants to avoid the embarrassment of that ever happening to her. And speaking of Zuko, that brings me to Azula's final scenes, her duel with Zuko and ultimate defeat. Azula's downfall is already complete before this battle begins, because the only thing she has left is herself and her firebending, and that alone is not enough. Her final duel is more about proving to herself that she is better and more worthy than Zuko than an actual fight over the Fire Nation. This final battle is a masterpiece on many levels. Because Azula has finally snapped and dropped her air of being in complete control, we see just how deadly and evil she really is, especially when in such a bad mood. The look on her face in every scene is the stuff of nightmares. It makes for an extremely engaging final battle, because she becomes so erratic that her moves are unpredictable, making the fight even more enthralling and exciting. The massive contrasting flames of orange and blue are beautifully displayed by some of the greatest directing and shot staging I have ever seen. The fury of two tortured characters unleashed. Zuko's flame of righteous fury, a man trying to prove once and for all he has changed to become a better person, finally understanding. And the hateful fury of Azula, who refuses to accept the truth of herself or anyone else, and desperately wants to prove, not to the world, but herself, that she is what she wants to believe she is. In a way, the colors are also symbolic, since it's a well-known fact in the film industry that orange, warmer colors give off a positive atmosphere to them, while darker, bluer colors feel cold and empty and give off a more negative atmosphere. Azula was never going to win this fight, and she knew that. She knows that fighting Zuko and Katara with the aid of no one else won't end in her victory. But she wants so badly to prove herself despite that. She is delaying the inevitable until she comes up with a plan. Her plan being to essentially cheat. She doesn't care at all by this point whether attacking Katara is dishonorable. She just wants to win. And Zuko blocking her attack is a poetic moment for him, as he wanted his honor back so badly, and now he is willing to do the most honorable thing, sacrificing himself for someone who used to hate him. All while Azula mocks the concept of honor by playing foul, while simultaneously deluding herself that she is somehow superior in every way. In the end, when she taunts Katara, she foolishly takes her minor victory over Zuko for granted and underestimates her, further paralleling Zuko, since he learned not to underestimate anyone after the first couple episodes.
The Fire Nation's greatest threat is just a little kid.
That kid, Uncle, just did this. I won't underestimate him again.
But Azula sees every victory, major and minor, as just more proof that she is perfect in every way. And so the fact that she is defeated in such a simple way, having her control taken away from her by being led into a trap, is genius. Katara defeats her by thinking about her surroundings, but Azula only could think about herself in this moment, and failed to take into account that Katara would ever think to use her environment to her advantage. After all, she's just a stupid, pathetic, worthless, weak girl. And on top of that, another great detail I noticed which makes this defeat all the more poetic, is that Katara used a similar trick on Zuko in the Siege of the North, trapping him in ice. Yet Zuko is able to escape. You might think at first that this is just an inconsistency, but I think not. Zuko is able to escape only because of what Iroh taught him.
Remember your breath of fire. It could save your life out there.
His specially developed fire breath techniques to keep himself warm inside, even in cold conditions. However, Azula never learned these techniques because she thought she was too good for Iroh's skills and wisdom. And yet now, she loses to Katara because she deliberately chose to ignore the same techniques that allowed Zuko to almost effortlessly escape the same situation, just because she already thought she was better than anyone else. In the end, Azula is the most pathetic of all. Her final scenes after being beaten are nothing less than chilling, choosing to say nothing, for her words would only condemn herself. The weight of trying to be the only one in control to ensure perfectionism has ultimately crushed her. Because she was too untrusting of anyone else, she got rid of them all, leaving her with no one else to blame but herself. Unlike her failure to finish off Aang at Ba Sing Se, she can't put the blame on someone else this time, because she is the only one left. She is destroyed by her own philosophy that you must always be perfect or be worthless. And she lies beaten, everyone and everything that was hers, lost, given to the brother she berated as lesser than herself all her life. Her speechlessness here shows that she cannot mentally accept what has happened. It goes against everything she believes, and if it is true, then she is worthless in her own eyes. In her mind, all it takes is one mistake. That is the insanity of perfectionism. The obsession she had over always being the best, always doing things perfect, only put more pressure on herself. It may seem fine at first, but the longer you go on, the more stressful things become, and you start to realize just how much of the world is out of your hands. One person cannot possibly be perfect at everything, because no one can know everything or spend the time to master and understand everything, and every situation you might need to be prepared for. The only cure to her insanity is humbleness, the ability to see yourself and your abilities for what they really are, to understand what you are and aren't capable of, to have a reasonable and accurate opinion of yourself and your abilities. But Azula closed every door leading that way, and eventually her problems began to stack until they were unsolvable, and eventually she would have to face the fact of her imperfection. But sadly, by this point, it was already too late. Her blind, aimless rage and tears as she lies there helplessly watching are almost heartbreaking to watch. Everything terrible that ever happened to her, she brought upon herself, and it was her own flawed perspective that kept her from improving herself. And you feel so bad for her because you know that this empty, broken husk isn't the real Azula, and neither was who she tried so hard to be. A real person lay trapped within herself, unable to escape because of all the walls she constructed around her true feelings and emotions. And ultimately she doomed herself when she could have been so much more. And finally, one of the best angles of Azula's character is how she reflects Zuko and his arc. Zuko was once lost and confused like she was, believing he needed an empty form of love and respect. But it was only through his difficulties, his setbacks, his mistakes and his losses that he ultimately learned what he wanted was meaningless, and that what he had, and what he could have if he saw past what he thought he wanted, was much better and more fulfilling. But unlike Zuko, Azula was too afraid to make a mistake, and if she ever did, she would never admit it. And her inability to admit her own mistakes and desire to avoid them so desperately was what caused her downfall. Zuko's mistakes taught him his most important lessons, and from them he discovered who he really was and how to become a better person. Azula, however, always saw herself as perfect and never learned from her mistakes, choosing to ignore them to avoid embarrassment instead. But because she did this, she never reflected upon her actions and learned from them. You can try as hard as you can to avoid ever making mistakes, but you will never understand what makes your mistakes so destructive if you are not the one making them. It isn't always about the end result, what negative things that happened, but what led to that final negative result that really matters.
Weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher,
failure is.
The contrast between how both Zuko and Azula started and ended is a symmetrically beautiful thing. The positions switch polarity completely. Zuko was brash and stubborn and reckless, venting his frustration through his words and actions, thinking he could regain what he had lost. But it was while he was alone, well, with Iroh most of the time, but still not as accepted as he wanted to be, that he discovered who he was and how to regain control of his own life, and that what others thought of him ultimately didn't matter because of who he was and who he saw himself as. The way he chooses to act and be as a person going forward is the most important thing, and that is what makes him and his life valuable. And through accepting himself and letting go of his past empty desires, he was ultimately accepted and honored in even greater ways than he had ever hoped for, taking full control of his own life and shaping it into a work of art. Azula, on the other hand, was initially the one who seemed fully in control of everything. She always got her way, and her competitive perfectionism made her appear as an almost unbeatable force who could achieve anything. But her life was never truly her own. She sold herself out to her father because she thought it was the only way to gain the power and respect she thought she deserved by birthright. And because of her flawed mindset, she never examined herself, and she led herself down a road to nowhere. As soon as her father didn't need her anymore, the one thing that allowed her to have so much power and control disappeared, and on her own, Azula's philosophies could not stand, and thus she lost all control of everything she ever had or ever achieved, and most importantly herself. Azula is the ultimate endpoint of what Zuko might have become. Azula's perfect life and pampered attitude prevented her from escaping her own delusions, and that is exactly the life and power and respect that Zuko initially wanted. But because it was taken from him, he found out that there were more important things in life than what he thought he wanted. And when he traded his newfound happiness for his old wish, he realized the truth of what was really important. Whereas Azula never could allow herself to even consider such ideas because she tricked herself into believing she had to be the way she was, and never learned the truth.
You tricked yourself.
I'm sure you can all guess that the big takeaway is to accept our failures and learn from them. Being a perfectionist from the start blinds you to seeing all angles. In art, you can never create a masterpiece simply by looking at something and drawing it. You have to understand it. And when it inevitably doesn't turn out the way you thought it should, simply saying something is wrong isn't good enough. You must analyze your mistakes and discover the root of the problem. Only then will you find out where you went wrong and how to avoid that mistake and do it right next time. And even then, people will always slip up in minor ways. But that has never made anyone lesser than someone else. And we should never see someone as lesser because they made small mistakes here and there. Zuko would never have become so bitter initially if he hadn't been cruelly scolded for simple things. Even if it did send him down the right path, the long way round, that's only because his family was kind of terrible and he had to get away from them. But I think you get my point. No one person can be perfect or achieve everything they set out to do. Building your life around that idea is insanity itself, because you'll probably be about as effective as Sisyphus in doing so.
Hey, I'd love to know your opinions on Azula as a character and a villain, or Avatar The Last Airbender in general too, if you want to leave that in the comment section down below. I try to read as many comments as possible, and I always read the early comments on my videos, so make sure you leave a comment now before a flood of comments show up, so that you can guarantee your comment will get read by me. Now seems like a good time to thank all my amazing and wonderful patrons and channel members who help to support me in ways that go beyond just viewing my videos. Oh, and on top of all that, the patrons in particular get early videos with no ads whatsoever, so hey, there's a bonus too. If you're desiring more content from myself but are getting tired of these very long waits in between videos, I apologize. I'm just working on a lot of big projects at the moment, I swear. You can check out my gaming channel to soothe the pain a little bit, and I hope that if you do check those videos out, you find them very entertaining and enjoyable. And lastly, while you're still here, I beg you not to leave until you check out this video over here, in which I talk about a thing. Definitely, I have planned out exactly what I'm telling you to watch right now. You can tell by what I'm saying. Anyways, or if that thing over there doesn't interest you, how about you check out this playlist of villain analysis videos? I'm sure there's at least one in there you're interested in. I mean, you clicked on this video after all. This is a villain analysis. The most important thing of all, though, is to always remember to stay iconic.